Hello, and welcome to this introduction into integrated curriculum and financial planning. So, who are we? Well, the Institute of School Business Leadership was awarded the contract for providing ICFP training in the form of this webinar session. ISBL is the professional body for school business professionals. Our sector-endorsed professional standards form the basis of the National School Business Management qualification and our own professional development training courses. So who am I? Well, my name is Cheryl Cardwell and I have been a practicing CFO who is also a practicing school resource management advisor with a vast amount of experience in seeing ICFP within a variety of settings. The aims of the session are quite clear and include providing you with an overview of integrated curriculum financial planning, look at the metrics involved and how to calculate these metrics, and also what they can tell you about your organisation. I will also explain what ICFP means to you in the role you undertake, and finally provide information on where else you can find further information on integrated curriculum financial planning. So, integrated curriculum financial planning. This is the process which utilises the school curriculum and staffing to lead financial planning alongside effective resource management, whilst also considering how we resource our curriculum, how we refresh our ICT, and obviously how we ensure our premises are fit for purpose. The key principles of ICFP. ICFP is a diagnostic tool that uses numerical measures to identify key issues within your organisation's resource use. It seeks to maximise efficiencies through effective resource management. It looks to ensure reductions in inefficiency or potential inefficiency. ICFP uses key diagnostic metrics to analyse your organisation. The metric analysis is a starting point for discussion. And ultimately, ICFP is about getting the balance of resource use right. Within the school setting, ICFP can support the strategic financial planning of the curriculum by allowing organisations to analyse their key metrics to determine where the spend is happening. The integrated approach to ICFP is related to schools getting the balance right. So, for example, if we're spending 90% of our budgets on staffing, then that leaves only 10% to resource our curriculum, maintain our premises, feed our pupils, and refresh our ICT equipment. Spending too little on these key areas could be detrimental and impact outcomes for pupils. Alternatively, spending too little on staffing could also be detrimental to pupil outcomes. So it's about getting the balance right to have the greatest impact. In terms of national benchmarks, we would suggest that non-staffing is around 25% of revenue income and staffing is around 75% of revenue income. There is a flexibility within the metrics for schools such as special schools, pupil referral units, or school settings that provide alternative provision. Quite often we use the benchmark of around 80% for staffing. However, we must remember that if 80% of our income is spent on staffing, then that leaves 20% for all other costs. ICFP, which has also been known as curriculum-led financial planning, has been around for many years and is not something new. It's not just about the curriculum. And the myth is that integrated curriculum financial planning is just for secondary schools and cannot be replicated in primary or special or all through schools. The metric analysis lends itself to any educational establishment. ICFP is not just about the staffing, in our organisation, and we should be looking at 3 years, both staffing and curriculum. It's a continual process of analysis. As an organisation, we need to look both backwards and forwards at the same time to what we have learnt and to determine future changes and reporting and responding to those in a timely manner. So we mentioned earlier that ICFP is a tool using numerical analysis. So what are they? Well, there are a number of metrics available to organisations. However, the 12 that we believe that the starting point are listed on the screen now. They will include metrics such as pupil-adult ratio, average teacher costs, contact ratio, teaching staff as a percentage of total revenue income, leadership costs as a total percentage of teaching costs. There are 12 key metrics that we would say that would be able to point you in the right direction. For example, when we're reviewing the per lesson cost, this will allow us to understand the cost of how much it is to deliver one lesson. It also allows us to understand that if we give a teacher additional non-contact time, the financial implication of that decision. Within the terms that we're referencing throughout this webinar, these can be found on the gov.uk website and they're called Common ICFP terms. So first things first, we need an accurate data set in order to determine accurate and meaningful metrics. So if we're using unreliable data, then the analysis will be meaningless. So what data should we be using? Well, firstly, you need your detailed 3-year budget forecast, including your pupil number predictions and your census data. The next piece of data that is required is a breakdown of staffing, including leadership and management. For example, categories of staffing such as admin, premises, or support assistants. You also need to know the number of full-time equivalents in your organisation for both teaching and non-teaching. You need to know your leadership structure and determine which staff are leadership and which staff are management. You will also need to know your TLR costs. Now, most good budget management pieces of software enable this type of information to be extracted with ease. Another valuable, crucial piece of information is the timetable cycle and the number of periods your teachers are teaching. This is relatively straightforward in a secondary. Within a primary setting or a special school setting, you will need to be able to calculate your teaching week and then determine how much contact time each teacher has. Finally, the relevant context of your organisation must be considered. For example, the percentage number of free school meal pupils you have. How many educational healthcare plan pupils do you have? What's your local authority? So just a quick question to ask yourselves. When calculating the pupil-teacher ratio, do we include the senior leadership team if they don't teach? Well, actually, the answer is yes. Every teacher's full-time equivalent must be added together as we're calculating teaching staff as a whole. Okay, so with all the information that we now have available, we can start to work out some key metrics and what this can tell us about our organisation. So let's examine the pupil-teacher ratio metric first. In this example, we have 620 pupils and determined that our school has 37 full-time equivalent teachers. We simply divide the number of pupils by the number of full-time equivalent teachers to calculate our pupil-teacher ratio, which in this example is 16.8. So we've done the calculations, but what does this mean? Well, as it says on the screen, if the pupil-teacher ratio shifts by 0.5 either way, this could mean that you need one full-time equivalent more, one full-time equivalent fewer for every 500 pupils. Pupil-teacher ratio must not be confused with class size. So a factor that could impact on pupil-teacher ratio could be that you have large classes, but lots of non-teaching leadership, which will bring the pupil-teacher ratio down. Within a special school, you would expect pupil-teacher ratio to be more around 6.5, with the top-up constraints of rising towards 7 to 7.5, depending on the size of your school. So let's now look at contact ratio and what this tells us. So to undertake this calculation, you need to know the number of full-time equivalent teachers and their teaching commitments, known as loading periods, and you need to know the number of lessons per week, otherwise known as the timetable cycle. We mentioned that in a primary setting or a special school setting, the timetable cycle will be the amount of time teachers are teaching within the week. So the calculation that we undertake is the total teacher loading periods, which is each teacher's timetable, divided by the total teacher periods available, which is actually our timetable cycle times by our full-time equivalent. And the contact ratio is usually expressed as a decimal, for example 0.72. So, question. When we are calculating the number of total teacher periods available, again, do we include the senior leadership team in those calculations? The answer would be yes. Every teacher's full-time equivalent must be added together, including SLT. And the reason we do this is because an allowance is made for PPA and management time within the calculation. That way, the number is then comparable between schools with different timetable cycles or within the same school between phases. Let's look at another example based around a secondary school setting. So the key information that we have is the number of full-time equivalent teachers, including senior leaders. We know that the timetable cycle is a 2-week timetable cycle with 50 periods over 2 weeks. And the total loading periods, which has been calculated to be 3,183. Remember, this is each teacher's teaching commitment added together. So the first calculation we need to do to work out the total available teaching periods. So this is if every teacher taught a maximum of 50 sessions over the 2 weeks. So within this example, the calculation is the number of FTE, which is 87.35, multiplied by 50 fortnightly sessions, which gives us a total of 4,367.5. The second part of the calculation is to calculate the contact ratio. And we do this by dividing the total loading periods, which is our 3,183, divided by the total periods available. So that's our maximum, which we calculated to be 4,365.5. which then gives us a contact ratio of 0.73. So this calculation will work regardless of your teaching timetable. So if your teaching timetable is 26.25, that will still work. Within a primary setting, the contact ratio can still be achieved by utilising either the actual teaching time within the day or splitting the day into sessions, say morning and afternoon. However, there is a word of caution if you're using morning and afternoon sessions. If you have staff who take PPA sessions in both the morning or the afternoon, there could be some disparity. Therefore, the best option really is to calculate total teaching time excluding registration. Quite often we see in primary settings that their teaching week is something like 25 sessions a week or 26.25. So if we move back to our example now, so we calculated the contact ratio to be 0.73. So what does that tell us? Well, if the average contact ratio is somewhere between 0.78 and 0.8, there is a potential inefficiency of 5 to 7% within the deployment of teaching staff. If, for example, the school's teaching budget is 1 million and the potential of inefficiency is 5 to 7% of your total teaching costs, this is quantified 50 to 70k. The low contact ratio could mean that teachers are having too much time out of class or there's too much management time. But these metrics allow you to ask the questions: is PPA too generous? Do we have too many teachers? We said earlier that whilst we've got the metrics, context is also key. So within the example, is the contact ratio purposely lower than average to address a school improvement priority? Just remember that context is key. As part of integrated curriculum financial planning, we also look to calculate staffing metrics measured against income and expenditure. To categorise the staffing, we use the consistent reporting framework codes to help us do this. Now, if you're not familiar with this framework, then the guidance can be found on .gov.uk. The categories are teaching staff, which includes supply teachers, educational support staff, which includes teaching assistants, higher level teaching assistant, nursery nurses, non-curriculum support staff, which includes admin, premises, welfare, catering staff. If catering and cleaning is outsourced, then the amount somewhere between 80% and 90% of that contract value should be added back into non-curriculum staffing. And the reason this is done is to get a true reflection of staffing costs. For example, if the service was not outsourced, then the school would have to employ those members of staff. So by adding these staffing costs in, each school can be benchmarked appropriately. All staffing includes all staffing, as previously highlighted. Senior leadership costs. The senior leadership costs include the salaries plus on costs of all senior leaders that are teaching staff. Now, I appreciate many school business managers, chief financial officers, chief operating officers are members of the senior leadership team. However, this calculation is a teaching metric, so only the teaching staff are included. Management costs. Now that's the raw values of TLRs plus the senior leadership costs that we just alluded to. These key metrics can tell us how efficient our organisation is and how our resources are being deployed. All the information that you need to calculate these are within your organisational budget. So let's look at another example. This time it's a primary school setting. So the income for the school is 2 million, and we have calculated that all staffing costs is 1.62 million. To calculate the percentage of income that's spent on staffing costs, we divide the all staffing costs by the total revenue income, times it by 100% to give our percentage. So within this scenario, it's 0.81, which is equivalent to 81%. So what does the 81% tell us? So if we're using an average benchmark of 75 to 78% of income being spent on all staffing costs, then the metrics tells us that this organisation is possibly spending 3 to 6% on staffing additional to the benchmark. So in this case, the potential inefficiency is costing the school from 60k up to 120k. So in terms of inefficiency, that could be 1 to 2 teachers. So again, quick question to ask ourselves. As we mentioned previously, management costs include senior leadership costs, full salary, and the costs of all TLRs. And the reason we include these is then it's a nationally comparable cost, and it will give us a true reflection of staff who have management responsibilities. So let's take that further and look at an example. So within this example, we want to calculate the senior leadership team and the management costs within this primary school setting. So the data that we have extracted from the budget is that our senior leadership costs are £119,158. The TLRs for the school are calculated to be £12,264, and the total teaching costs are £552,909. So the calculations that we will use are the senior leadership team costs divided by the total teaching cost times 100 to give our percentage. And then the second part of the calculation is those senior leadership costs plus the TLR costs. Then we divide that by the total teaching costs, times it by 100 to give our percentage. So let's take a look at the first line for our calculations. SLT costs of 119,158 divided by the 552,909 teaching staff costs multiplied by the 100 give us 21.6%. Second part of our calculation is exactly the same, only this time we're adding the senior leadership costs and the TLR values, then dividing it by our total staffing costs, times it by 100 to give a percentage of 23.8. So 21.6% of our total teaching costs are being spent on senior leaders, and 23.8% of our total teaching costs are being spent on management. So again, what is that telling us? So in this scenario, the school are paying more on leadership and management than the benchmark thresholds. So this could mean the leadership team is too big. The metrics are a starting point for conversation and the information needs to be triangulated. Is the organisation aware that their costs are too high? Is there a specific reason? Are the organisation getting value for money from their structure? And the same reasoning can be applied to those high management costs. But also, does the organisation have too many TLRs? Is the management structure too expensive? Again, the context must also be considered. So moving on to non-curriculum staffing costs. When calculating, do we include cleaning and catering if this is outsourced? As we mentioned previously, the reason we include these staffing costs is because if cleaning and catering is outsourced, then a portion of the contract must be added back into staffing, somewhere between 80 and 90%. If we didn't outsource the contract, then the school would have to employ these staff, which is why we add them back in. So let's look at another example. This time it's a special school setting and they have outsourced cleaning contracts. So income we have at 2 million. Non-curriculum staffing costs are calculated to be 150k and our outsourced cleaning contract is 40k. So we need to go through a few calculations to get us to our total non-curriculum support staffing costs. So firstly, let's look at the cleaning contract. So the cleaning contract is 40k, and in this example we've determined that 90% of that is attributed to staffing. So to calculate the financial amount that we would need to add into the non-curriculum support staffing costs, we take the 40,000, multiply it by 90%, which gives us 36,000. We then add the 36,000 into our previously calculated non-curriculum staffing costs, 150, which gives us a total of non-curriculum staffing as 186k. The final stage of the calculation is to determine the non-curriculum support staff costs. We therefore need to divide the total non-curriculum staffing costs by the income, times it by 100, and this will give us a total non-curriculum staffing cost as a percentage of income. Now in this example, we've calculated that to be 9.3%. So again, we've done the calculation, but what does it mean? Well, the average non-curriculum staffing costs as a percentage of income are somewhere between 6 and 8%. So using this national average, the benchmark is telling us that this organisation is spending slightly more above the national average, and if we want to quantify that, it's 26 to 66k. If we're suggesting that 75 to 78% of our income is spent on staffing, we must also compare non-staffing costs to ensure value for money, remembering that a proportion of our non-staffing costs are also fixed, for example our rates. So we need to review and compare other costs such as our energy, our administrative costs, our premises costs, our educational supplies and services, including bought-in provisions. We need to look, are we making best use of national deals, for example, the Schools Buying Hub? When undertaking some of our examples earlier, we mentioned benchmarks. So when we're interpreting data, we know and understand the national benchmarks. Make use of the School Resource Management Self-Assessment Toolkit. It's based on schools' information, whether you're an academy or a maintained school. Furthermore, within the toolkit there are benchmark thresholds for a wide range of educational settings. These include special schools and alternative provision. Use the context information about your organisation to make a judgment on whether or not the values are appropriate. If your metrics are within thresholds, don't assume that nothing can be done. And remember, if there are good reasons to spend a little more in one area, you must make savings in another or you will struggle. Remember, integrated curriculum financial planning is a process which utilises the school curriculum and staffing to lead financial planning alongside effective resource management. The ultimate goal is to provide a fit-for-purpose curriculum that is affordable, using the metrics to support the strategic planning process and ensuring resources are deployed effectively to support pupil outcomes. So the key messages: know your organisation's key metrics. Know how to compare with other organisations. Understand where your inefficiencies may lie. Understand how integrated curriculum planning can be used in the organisation to have the greatest impact. And remember, impact is key. Understand the importance of having accurate financial data. And look at the balance of expenditure with income. For school business leaders, your role is key in providing that accurate financial information. Greater understanding of how resources are deployed. Have a greater understanding of how the curriculum and finances are linked. And ultimately, you need to be able to spot areas that are out of kilter. Key messages for heads and CEOs. This will allow you to have a greater understanding of your key metrics. Have a greater understanding of how your resources are deployed and how much your curriculum is actually costing you. It will provide you with a strategic approach to curriculum and financial planning. And again, be able to spot areas that are out of kilter and understand why. The key messages for governors and for trustees. This type of analysis can provoke questioning. It will give you as trustees and governors greater understanding of how the school are deploying their resources. And it will equip you with the right information and know what the possible responses mean. Now, there are many resources available for you to look at. There's this free workshop. There's the School Resource Management Self-Assessment Toolkit. There is the Top 10 Planning Checks for Governors. There is the DFE National Benchmark Data. There's the DFE School Workforce Planning Documents. There is also the DFE Basic Principles of ICFP and that glossary of terms. Other resources include the buying hubs and the national deals for schools, the frameworks that are available. There's financial advice for schools available, and all those that we've previously mentioned are available on the gov.uk website. Within that website, they also have online curriculum planning tools for both secondary schools and primary schools. Then there are some other resources available that aren't on the gov.uk website, and these include, for example, the Creston Benchmarking Report, the Hacker Young Benchmarking Report. There's the Outward Grange Model approach to integrated curriculum financial planning. There's the ASCL model, which is known as the Equation of Life, and there are various other ICFP tools available. Thank you for listening.